today's conversation will really revolve around a feminine approach to climate change. As much of this discussion has only really been recently coming to light, and even myself, I wasn't too aware about this. Could you maybe start by expanding on what this approach is and what it means to have a feminine approach to climate change?
Sure. I mean, I come to this as a mother, as a sister, as a daughter, as a founder and CEO of an organization that is passionate about the empowerment of women to create change. I don't come to this as an expert in climate change, but at the same time, as much as my work intersects many areas that are essential to women globally, our climate and our environment has to be the overall canopy of what we need to be focusing our energy and time on. So I have been drawn to it more and more and more, and I know that we have talked about that over the past few months. And as I become more aware of the issues, and I want to educate myself, and I want to educate my children, and I want to be someone who is not only an advocate, but an active person within this movement, I feel myself sometimes concerned, or not concerned is the right word, but wondering and curious if the approach there could be a complementary approach, not a different approach, but a complementary approach. And when we understand the issues for climate change and how they intersect among women around the world, we know that women are most adversely affected by climate change. And we know that that intersects with many things, whether that be gender-based violence or poverty or race or age or many other intersectionalities of gender. And when we think about feminine maybe as opposed to female, the concept of feminine is really fascinating to me, because the feminine is a spiritual, philosophical concept that really transcends gender identity. It's about a way of being. It is those feminine values of compassion and collaboration and humanity that really, really, really interests me. And I wonder whether our approach often to climate change is embedded in the patriarchal system, is embedded in masculine and more traditional ways of approaching it, and that there may be a different way of doing this. And I'm not the only one that's thinking this, of course. I'm looking out there into the world, and there are many women that go, yeah, this makes complete sense, and this is how I approach things. That we're looking at this not just from the more, a lot of my male colleagues maybe will talk about, carbon reduction and cars and solar and all of these different things, which are also, of course, completely important. But it's got to be, doesn't it, like the human behavior underneath these that we really need to address, and the systemicness of that needs to be addressed. And I believe that women are at the forefront of that change.
Thank you so much for that. I definitely, kind of with this with these systemic issues that are resurfacing, we definitely need to question whether another approach or another way of dealing with the problem might be more efficient. You touched on this briefly, but I wanted to ask if maybe you had a few more comments to say on why there is truly a need for this approach, and for example, some of the main reasons maybe why women are being so disproportionately affected by climate change. Because personally, I was very shocked to, for example, read the extent of this disparity in cases like natural disasters, like floods and droughts. And I thought that might be a valuable insight to add as well.
Yeah, it was actually, we as an organization, we did a conference last week for young women. And one of our young speakers, she's very passionate about climate refugees. And I had not heard of this phrase, climate refugees. And so the amount of women, people, but overall, the United Nations research tells us that over 80% of people that are affected by affected through displacement is through climate change. And so what we find is that, you know, there are many, many issues going on in the world, Agatha, but they're all somewhat separate, aren't they, in some ways? We say, okay, I'm really passionate about poverty. I'm really passionate about race. I'm really passionate about gender. I'm really passionate about climate change. But when we start to see how these, I like to use the word interconnect rather than intersect. When we see how things interconnect, we can start to understand, not only does it make it tougher and more challenging for women in a number of ways. If you're displaced through natural disaster, and then you have to cross borders and you need to go to a different country, and you experience sexual violence along your journey, and then you get to a different country and you are a different color and you have to try and start a new life and a new job as a different race, you've already got 3 different things that are interconnected in terms of your challenges. And so then we start to talk about oppression and suppression and how that's much, much tougher for women when they are experiencing all of these different things. At the same time, it makes women extremely resilient to be able to overcome, to be able to stand up against, to be able to walk miles often with your children with you, is something that is beyond many of our minds to fathom. That the resilience of our refugees, the resilience and what we have to go through to be able to get to where we want to get to is phenomenal. And I don't know that we're really looking enough at the strengths of women, at the resilience of women. And I interview women around the world, and I love to interview women who have had a difficult and resilient journey, and they are often the 1 in 1,000 or the 1 in 1,000,000 woman who has managed to change her life. And I always say to her, you know, what is it about you that has enabled you to get to where you are? And they often say some of the same things, which they say, I knew that the only person that was going to do this was me. I knew that I couldn't necessarily rely on my family or my society or my government or my school or my job, my organization to do it for me. I knew it had to be me. And as tough as that was, they made this turning point decision. And when I interview these women, I always think the same thing. Why aren't you running the planet? Why aren't you running the planet? Why is it that you are in this job, when if we could get you and the other women like that together and have that as the committee that runs this planet, because it would be a committee, right? Because we're collaborative and we're democratic and we are empathetic and we want to work that way, it would make a terrific difference. Take example of someone like the Jacinda Ardern in New Zealand. Look at her much more feminine approach to running that country and the difference it's making. If that could be replicated worldwide, not just on a country basis, but on a family basis, on a company basis, on a community basis, in our churches, in our schools, it would make such a terrific ripple effect of a difference. So I'm not talking necessarily about this being about the government leaders or the executives or the CEOs, and I know that's important and we need to have that kind of change from the top. I'm talking about everyday women doing their thing, being able to make a difference. And if we are conscious of how our everyday actions as women make a difference to climate change, I believe we can change the world very quickly. That's my vision anyway.
I must say that's a beautiful one. And I guess as a young woman, I would wish to aspire to something exactly while you were speaking. It came to mind, like, for example, as a woman or as kind of any individual that, as you said, might not have a position in a place of government or as a CEO or in a place of particular influence. What do you think is really the way exactly that the ordinary person can in some ways work towards implementing this, and as you said, like from the bottom to the top, and then potentially bringing it out onto a larger scale?
Yeah, I think there's a few different things, Agatha. I think first of all, the more aware we are of that interconnectedness, the better. So the first step would definitely be awareness. You said when you became aware of how women are affected through floods and disasters of climate change, blew your mind. Oh, I didn't really understand. It's not that you didn't understand it, you didn't really think about it, you didn't really know about it. So the more that we can educate ourselves, and the more that we can educate ourselves globally, I think many of us are very, very focused, as we should be, on our immediate family and our immediate community. But do we really understand what's going on in different parts of the world? And it's incredible once you start understanding what's going on in different parts of the world. So be aware and be a global citizen would be the first thing I say. You don't have to be overwhelmed by it. You don't have to, become an expert on global issues, but start to become aware. The second thing is what I call the human passion, that we all have this flame inside us. We all have this passion that we want to direct at something. So, oh, okay, I'm passionate. I'm going to direct it at my career, or I'm going to direct it at my loved one. I'm going to direct it at my children. I'm going to direct it at climate change. I'm going to direct it at poverty. And then we direct this passion at this shadow on the wall of the thing that we want to see changed. What can happen though is that we can become so focused on that the flame starts to flicker, and we have this term burnout. And so it's very important that we keep our flame alive. We keep that passion alive. And I see this a lot with activists in particular, that they're burning out. And so it's not just about self-care, because self-care is often about averting a disaster. It's about self-awareness, looking after ourselves and being really aware of what we do, how we do it, and keeping that flame alive for a very long time. All right. Thirdly, I would say to operate from the feminine. And so when we use terms like crisis and disaster and fight and protest and revolution and war and life or death and division, it is not that helpful in keeping the flame alive. It's a sort of short-term boost to the flame. But if we are more focused on vision and collaboration and evolution and peacemaking and inclusion, and having a lust for life and a lust for the passion, then we have much more chance that we will make better and sustainable decisions. And I'm a really big believer in baby steps, and those are completely individual to the person. And we need to empower ourselves and others to think about, what do I want to do? What could I do? So last week in this conference we were running, some young women were talking about being plant-based, eating plant-based as something that would really make a difference to the climate. And also they were talking about recycling clothes, upcycling clothes. And I thought to myself, this is two things that we do not do in our household. This is two things that we could do in our household. So we've had the conversation and we've started eating plant-based burgers and doing much more plant-based. We haven't got quite rid of my son's hot dogs yet, but we're working on it. My daughter loves to sew. And so she loves the idea of recycling and upcycling her clothes. But that's something that works right now for us as a family.
However, what do you think what does that play in terms of the fact that, for example, women are expected to be resilient, or that resiliency is really seen as a quality, but then that accountability must also be balanced at the same time? How does accountability and resiliency play in terms of branding something as resilient, but then not taking accountability for changing that? I'm not sure if that question was clear, but.
So let me have a go at it, and you can tell me whether it's where you were wanting it to go. So I think sometimes there is a a tension between personal empowerment and personal resiliency and the accountability of what the system needs to do in order to change. And the system being our governments and our corporate executives and our policies and all of these things that need to happen. And there is sometimes a resentment. Why is it that I have to be doing all these things when the change needs to be coming from other? And it's a place that we're in right now historically where there is that tension. And there's almost a gap that I do believe is closing, where the two need to come together and work together in more harmony and more collaboration. We're definitely not there yet. But when you start to see that some of the leading people globally with regards to climate change are women, and you start to see some of those women and the work that they're doing politically in the US, in globally too, you can start to see those two things slowly coming together. The other thing I would say about resiliency and accountability is that the more community that's created where we are with like-minded others, it won't just be our own responsibility to be resilient. So think of it like this. Often when we're walking down a street and maybe we fall over, like I fell over at the start of COVID, I was walking my dog and went tumbling down the street. When we fall over, we think it's our responsibility to pick ourselves up, which is what resilience is. Okay, I've fallen over, something's happened, let me pick myself up. And we try and pick ourselves up as quickly as we can with the least embarrassment, with the least amount of people knowing that we fell over. Yeah, this is the traditional approach to resilience. But actually, if we are with others who are like-minded, there's a chance, well, multiple things could happen when we fall over. Someone else could pick us up. Other people could sit down on the street with us. It could be more fun and more interesting when we are making these hurdles and traveling this path with others. Interestingly, maybe I'm quite a clumsy person. So for some reason I like to fall over. I fell over again, same street, same dog. About 6 months later, I had my daughter with me. I fell over again and I ended up sort of falling over and landing on the curb on the sidewalk. And instead of getting up really quickly again, I sat there for a while and my daughter was like, what are you doing? You know, she started to get embarrassed. And I said, no, sit down with me. And we sat there on the curb for about 5 minutes before I felt better and we got up and we did it together. And that would be an example for me of a new type of resilience where we do things together, that we're not afraid to sit down for a while. We're not afraid to do that with others. And we're not worried when, you know, some people came out of their house and were like, what are you doing sitting down on my curb? You know, we can handle that kind of stuff too. And actually we managed to make some of the neighbors laugh. So that would be my thoughts on resilience and accountability.
That was exactly an answer to what I was trying to convey. Thank you so much for that. I definitely also share this this sense. I was really inspired by what you said exactly of kind of trying to challenge small things that we do, for example, that we assume that we have to pick ourselves up when we fall, and challenging that on the wider scale, and how we don't have to be so afraid of something different, maybe something that we're not used to. And also another comment that you made kind of brought me back to a question that's been asked about women's experiences. So about when we build this community, do you think that women's experiences across the world are similar, maybe similar enough to build such a community? And how can we create an international coalition of women across the globe, embracing our diversities and vastly different experiences?
Oh, well, that's such a great question. Is that something you've got planned, Agatha, to create that global coalition?
Well, hopefully, I would love to start in my small community.
Anybody interested that's listening? Put it on the chat now. Let's go for it. A global coalition of women who are passionate about climate change. I can't think of anything more fabulous to be part of. I really can't. So I think to answer your question, are women's experiences different or the same around the world? And how do we collaborate as women when our experiences can be very different? I really do believe that both the challenges, goals, and aspirations of women globally are very similar, very, very similar, that we want similar things. We want to love our lives. We want to make a difference. We want to do meaningful work. We want to grow. We want to be happy. We want to have a sustainable planet for ourselves and for future generations. We all want the same things. When I talk to women around the world, they'll all tell me similar challenges, that they have challenges with their time, that they have challenges financially, that they have challenges with the masculine hierarchy within their organizations, that they feel like they aren't so confident as they would like to be, that they would love to be more courageous. What changes, though, is the context of that challenge. So we could have a woman who could be in a situation which could be dangerous to her health, could be dangerous to her well-being, could be dangerous to her physical life even. We might make up that could be in a developing country, but that could be anywhere globally. So the context is different. The societal context is different too. So what is available to a woman in some countries is different to what is available to a woman in another country. And that can lead to problems because then women start to feel like, well, my problem is less than, I'm in a developed country. I shouldn't be complaining. I hear that a lot. I shouldn't be complaining. When we did, again, I'm coming back to this conference last week, and we had speakers from around the world. They were all under 25. And I did notice that the speakers, the young women from the developed world, were all talking about climate change. And the speakers from the developing world were generally talking about gender-based violence and wanting to end that, and for education. So it seems almost like there are different areas of focus depending on where you live. But everything, as I say, is so interconnected and we can support each other. I think that when we come together based on mission and vision and values, it will be more important than where we come from or what we look like. And so to really bring together that diversity of women and the diversity of the feminine will be critical to creating that kind of coalition, and that it's done in a more feminine way. Perhaps the more masculine traditional way would to be have a vision statement and have a big document as to the objectives of something like this. And I think a lot of women are somewhat off-put by that and want something that has more nature to it, more flow to it, and more empowerment rather than being told what to do. I don't like being told what to do. I don't know that many people like to be told what to do. We get told what to do all the time.
Just on this topic as well, and I've been seeing a lot of comments about this, about the idea of activism and about the idea of for example, separating between women or between different genders, and how in some ways this could polarize the message that we're trying to get across, or exactly this feminine concept that transcends gender, but how this could be interpreted in terms of which gender it associates to. So I was just wondering whether you saw this as a potential problem and how we can avoid reinforcing division and polarization, and tackle this again from the community center, in the sense that we all share a mission and we want to go forward with that mission.
Yeah, I think it's a great question, Agatha. And if we focus on the vision of it, of what we were trying to create, and the heart-centeredness of it, I believe it will attract all people who are passionate about the feminine, whatever the gender identity is. it may be that initially, because this is more aligned with the biological, psychological of the female, that there would be many, many women within this movement. At the same time, it's very critical that we all can come together. We've been very focused in recent years on difference. How are we different? How am I different? And yet, where we do need to be focusing on is, how are we the same? How are we the same? What is our commonality? What is our common vision? And when we focus on those things, I believe that it won't be seen as a problem. Again, it's a very masculine approach to say problem solution. There's many places in between there, many colorful places in between problem and solution that the feminine focuses on. I don't know if you've ever seen the game Whack-A-Mole. I don't know if you know the game Whack-A-Mole. It's a kids game, and something pops up and then you whack it and then something else pops up. Well, that's the approach to problem solving that I see. We're constantly looking for problems, and then we say, okay, I need to solve this problem, and we solve the problem and whack the Whack-A-Mole, and then another problem pops up, and then we do the same, and then another problem pops up. Anyone feel like that's their current life? So we do need to sort of come away from that and not just be purely focusing on solving problems, but instead looking at the bigger picture of what we're trying to create here, which is very much the feminine way of doing things.